One of the most influential journalists in the lead up to World War II was someone you've probably never heard of. Her column, On the Record, was read by 8 million people nationwide, when the country's population was half the size it is now. In 1939, Time magazine equated her reach to that of Eleanor Roosevelt. Dorothy Thompson was a household name. Hi, my name is Doriel. This channel was born because me and my husband both studied history in college and don't feel like we have much to show for it. In order to put our overpriced degrees to good use, we decided to use this channel to combat the widespread misinformation being churned out across the internet. That way, we didn't do all that work for nothing. Born in Lancaster, New York in 1893, Thompson graduated from Syracuse University in 1914. From there, she dove straight into the women's suffrage movement. Her time in the movement shaped her political sentiment and her style as a writer. She often wrote op-eds on the movement that were published in the New York Times and the New York Herald. Once the women's suffrage amendment was passed, Thompson left for Europe to begin her long career as a foreign correspondent. She rose to fame when she posed as a nurse to get a scoop on a story about a former Habsburg emperor who was looking to retake the Hungarian throne. The Habsburgs are this family, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you all, dear friends.
Her fearless approach to journalism got her promoted to the full-time Vienna correspondent and bureau chief of Central Europe for the Philadelphia Public Ledger. Maybe no other American in the interwar period knew more about Europe than Dorothy Thompson. One of the greatest stories from Dorothy's legendary career happened in 1926 when she attended an opera in Vienna. After hearing that a coup had broken out in Poland, she left instantly and caught an overnight train into Warsaw. Upon her arrival, she realized that she didn't have any money. Being the weekend, the banks were all closed. So she calls her personal friend Sigmund Freud, who sends her a driver with a stack of cash to get her on her way. As soon as the train passes the border into Poland, they realize that the train tracks had been blown out. Not to be deterred, Dorothy jumps out of the train and seeks passage on 2 separate vehicles that happen to be passing by her on the way into town, which both refuse. The first vehicle takes fire when it enters the town, causing her contemporaries to mistakenly wire her obituary back to Vienna. In reality, Dorothy had walked the last few miles into Warsaw, still in her ball gown and slippers, allegedly swearing up a storm as she trudged through the mud. As the saying goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The current administration's most recent campaign to silence its many critics has ramped up since recapturing the White House, exemplified by their blatant interference in the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel, which even has conservatives raising their eyebrows. Although definitely not the first or most egregious infringement of the Constitution committed by the administration, it was so stupidly public it couldn't be ignored. Previous administrations going as far back to the 1700s have treated the press as a necessary nuisance at best. Since the United States' rise to global superpower, the relationship between the American government and journalists has grown increasingly hostile. Richard Nixon hired Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy as plumbers assigned to stop the press leaks coming from the White House.
Yeah, well, and incidentally on this, all this business about, the plumber's operation, good God, that's totally justified, isn't it? Yes, sir. Well, or is it?
The pair discussed killing reporter Jack Anderson by wiping LSD on his steering wheel, causing him to hallucinate and crash. Their plan was only foiled by their arrest in the Watergate burglary. The Biden administration compromised freedom of the press routinely, particularly when it came to Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza.
You pontificate about a free press? You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me.
Please, sir, respect the process.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ is saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal! Why aren't you in The Hague?
Not coincidentally, this last year, an alarming surge of journalists were killed in the field, particularly covering the genocide still happening in Palestine. With the mass censorship campaign we're seeing right now, this number is likely to keep rising. The current administration has kept this Israel first policy when violating the First Amendment, as in the cases of Mahmoud Khalil, Mohsen Mandawi, and Rumeysa Ozturk. The freedom of the press to criticize those in power and inform the public is a bedrock of American culture. Free speech could not exist without this pillar attached. What the FCC is doing now is terrifying, and we should all be very concerned. It seems like their ultimate goal is getting rid of any opposition to them or their harmful policies. This objective is synonymous with authoritarian regimes. We've seen it countless times with other totalitarian-minded actors, think Putin. Dorothy Thompson experienced this herself after becoming the first American journalist expelled from Germany in 1934. Hitler kicked the pugnacious journalist out personally for a scathing article she'd written years prior. Thompson said upon her departure, "My offense was to think that Hitler is just an ordinary man after all. That is a crime in the reigning cult in Germany, which says Mr. Hitler is a messiah sent of God to save the German people." Dorothy Thompson saw Hitler coming earlier than most of the world. In a time period when he was able to enrapture the German masses, Thompson was unimpressed. She first covered the Nazis as early as 1924. After reading Mein Kampf, Thompson set out for the next 7 years chasing Hitler across Europe for the chance to interview the man behind the growing right-wing movement. When she finally sat down with him, her ultimate assessment was that he was the prototype of the little man, a formless, faceless, and insecure figure who was nobody to be afraid of. Thompson also addressed the seriousness of the Nazis' hateful policy against the Jews in Germany. In a time when many downplayed the growing atrocities, Thompson spoke up, going on a massive speaking tour across the United States.
Very many people seem to think that the persecution of the Jews, which has followed the accession to power of Hitler, is the result of something that they have done. As a matter of fact, anti-Semitism has been a plank in the National Socialist platform for 13 years. So-called civilized people didn't believe that if they came to power, they would carry this program out.
She advocated for Jewish refugees when as little as 1 in 10 Americans supported letting them in the country. Thompson was remarkably unafraid. In 1939, she attended a rally by the German-American Bund, the most flagrant organization of Nazi sympathizers. 22,000 people packed Madison Square Garden. Thompson was seated in the front row of the press box and began uproariously laughing during the fascist speeches. When she was escorted out by the police, she simply found her way back to her seat, which by then was surrounded by a dozen Bund stormtroopers. She was undeterred and disrupted the rally again, yelling "Bunk!" at the stage until she was kicked out a second time. One biographer called her the leading American voice in a war against fascism. Compare this with the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, William Lyon Mackenzie King, who compared the Austrian corporal to Joan of Arc. King's admiration for the German dictator was so great, he referred to their meeting as the day for which he was born. Or to fellow journalist Viscount Rothermere, who created the Daily Mail, an unapologetically conservative rag from its creation. It had championed the fascist movement as far back as 1922. Rothermere corresponded with Hitler often, even getting an exclusive interview in 1930. The next year, the paper supported Oswald Mosley and his British Union of Fascists. The Daily Mail is still in publication and still owned by Rothermere's descendants. Supporting despots for strategic convenience or financial gain is a recurring theme in the West well into the 21st century.
I looked the man in the eye. I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and the best interests of his country.
By 1941, Dorothy Thompson had been covering the Nazis so long, she began to recognize the type. She collected her observations in an article titled "Who Goes Nazi?" In it, she describes a macabre parlor game where you determine who in a showdown would go Nazi. Thompson divided these types by letter: Mr. A, Mr. B, and Mr. C. While some of the described characteristics are products of their time, others are profoundly timeless. The gentleman standing beside the fireplace with an almost untouched glass of whiskey. Beside him on the mantelpiece is Mr. A. He's poor and earns his living as an editor. He has had a classical education, has a sound and cultivated taste in literature, painting, and music, has not a touch of snobbery in him, is full of humor, courtesy, and wit. He was a lieutenant in the World War, as a Republican in politics, but voted twice for Roosevelt, last time for Wilkie. He is modest, not particularly brilliant, a staunch friend and a man who greatly enjoys the company of pretty and witty women. His wife, whom he adored, is dead, and he will never remarry. He has never attracted any attention because of outstanding bravery, but I will put my hand in the fire that nothing on earth would ever make him a Nazi. He would greatly dislike fighting them, but they could never convert him. Beside him stands Mr. B, a man of his own class, graduate of the same preparatory school and university, rich, a sportsman, owner of a famous racing stable, vice president of a bank, married to a well-known society belle. He is a good fellow and extremely popular, but if America were going Nazi, he would certainly join up, and early. He married for money, and he has done lots of other things for money. His code is not his own. It is that of his class. No worse, no better. He fits easily into whatever pattern is successful. That is his sole measure of value, success. Nazism as a minority movement would not attract him. As a movement likely to attain power, it would. Mr. C is a brilliant and embittered intellectual. He was a poor, white trash Southern boy, a scholarship student at 2 universities where he took all the scholastic honors, but was never invited to join a fraternity. His brilliant gifts won for him successively government positions, partnership in a prominent law firm, and eventually a highly paid job as a Wall Street advisor. He has always moved among important people and always been socially on the periphery. His colleagues have admired his brains and exploited them, but they have seldom invited him or his wife to dinner. He is a snob, loathing his own snobbery. He despises the men about him, but his contempt is inextricably mingled with envy. Even more than he hates the class into which he has insecurely risen, does he hate the people from whom he came. He hates his mother, and he hates his father for being his parents. He loathes everything that reminds him of his origins and his humiliations. Pity he has utterly erased from his nature, and joy he has never known. He has an ambition, bitter and burning. It is to rise to such eminence that no one can ever again humiliate him, not to rule, but to be the secret ruler, pulling the strings of puppets created by his brains. Already some of them are talking his language, though they have never met him. He is a very dangerous man. Were he primitive and brutal, he would be a criminal, a murderer. But he is subtle and cruel. He would rise high in a Nazi regime. It would need men just like him, intellectual and ruthless. But Mr. C is not a born Nazi. He is the product of a democracy hypocritically preaching social equality and practicing a carelessly brutal snobbery. He is a sensitive, gifted man who has been humiliated into nihilism. He would laugh to see heads roll. If any of you can think of any more examples of Misters A, B, or C, mention them down in the comments. A few months after the article was published, the rest of the United States finally caught up to Dorothy Thompson. But for millions trapped in Europe, it was already too late. Thompson continued her work, advocating for refugees, including her support for Palestinians displaced after the Nakba in 1947.
I am Dorothy Thompson, and I have been asked to introduce Sands of Sorrow because I have recently returned from visiting the scenes of the picture you are about to see. Of course, the impression left on my mind by these wretched casualties of political change is much more distressing than the film. For no film can convey the icy winds from Mount Hermon as they blow upon crazy, flawless tents in Syria, or the rains that turn dwellings into mud holes in the rainy season in Lebanon, nor the defeated feeling even of those who are trying to help. But this film tells part of a story that until now has hardly been told at all outside the Arab world.
Dorothy Thompson is truly a fascinating figure, and it's a shame she isn't more well known today. She lived a remarkable life. Honestly, it feels like we only scratched the surface. She is the perfect historical example for why freedom of the press is so critical, and why its erosion is a clear step toward authoritarianism. We should note that Germany in the 1930s and America today is not a one-to-one comparison, but when clear and obvious patterns are presenting themselves, you have to notice and take action. People took action last week, and it's why ABC reversed their decision on Jimmy Kimmel. No matter what ABC wants you to think. Actions like these are the only way a massive corporation like Disney will respond. The capitulation of ABC, CBS, and the Washington Post paying out large settlements, changing their entire ownership structure, and compromising their journalistic integrity so that they could continue getting the possibility of scraps from the regime's table is utterly shameful. We are at risk of a huge chunk of news becoming official news.
The real issue between the foreign correspondents and the German government concerns the nature of journalism. The German government allows its own press only to publish official news, news which it believes to be in support of the present regime. And it seems to have the attitude that the foreign press should also share this point of view. Now, we don't share it. We think it's the business of journalism to report everything that happens, regardless of whether it's to the glory or not of one regime or another, and as far as possible to represent every point of view in our reports.
This is why authoritarian, or in this case, want to be authoritarian regimes, are so scared of journalism, especially good journalism. Authoritarianism functions on a specific aesthetic that is pushed into the mainstream using deliberate optics and propaganda. Journalists that aren't beholden to what the administration is trying to push are seen as a major threat. With so much of media now online, where creators can upload pretty much whatever they want, it is getting harder and harder for the powers that be to crack down on freedom of speech. That's not to say for lack of trying. Even with the use of algorithms that push more compliant content and less of a certain video, if a video doesn't go viral, one of the many other creators can push their own content on the same subject to get the news out there anyway. It seems clear the administration's next step will be to acquire the cooperation of major platforms, limiting spaces even further. So, what can we do? Well, for one, money talks. We've seen this already with the Disney boycott, losing the company close to $4 billion almost overnight. When we realize that we can collectively speak with our dollars, great things can happen. But just because Disney decided to roll back on their cowardly cooperation now doesn't mean that they won't do it again sometime in the future. Save that money you would be spending on a Disney account and put it towards something worthwhile. One thing my husband and I decided to do was give a monthly donation to PBS, who could really use it right now thanks to the administration's budget cuts. I also want to remind everyone, authoritarian rule only works if you give them your power and give in to the fear. So, keep speaking up and speaking out. Keep pushing for change and justice. And fuck you, make me. Also known as never comply in advance. We all should try and harness some of whatever Dorothy Thompson had. Call it confidence or courage. I like to think of it as gumption. As always, thank you for watching. If you found any of this informative, please give it a like, tell us what you thought in the comments, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications so you never miss an upload. Until next time, remember, the future is ahead of us.